Welcome to Bat Therapy, psychology of Batman, superheroes, and other comic book characters. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We are your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. Okay, so we're doing May Mental Health Awareness Month kind of stuff. And for our last Tuesday in May, we decided to talk about what would keep a superhero from getting the mental health help that they might need.
A lot,
right? Because we talked
Yes.
about, okay, so what kinds of treatments might there be out there? How to think about a therapist if, say, Batman was trying to go for that. But what if someone might actually be able to benefit, but they're not reaching out for the treatment? So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I think could get in the way for, and I mean, like, we'll just generally talk about superheroes. I'm sure a bunch of different scenarios can come up, but I feel like also a lot of these things are the reasons that we don't necessarily get help when it might be useful.
Right. And so I definitely did a thing. I definitely thought about this a lot because I think about how difficult it is for us to even make time for it or have time for it. It's difficult as is, right?
Yep.
Working a full-time job, being parents, having one of those jobs where you can't just take off whenever you need to for a doctor's appointment. All of these things are factors. Add in a whole nother side job that involves people constantly shooting at you and trying to kill you. Even more, because now that's even less time you're going to have sleeping.
Yep.
And the thing is, and there's only a handful of superheroes that are the daytime ones. And it's the ones that are just completely overpowered, like Superman. It's like, oh, I'll just run to a phone booth and fly to France in 3 seconds. Like he can do this. He can make time. But the average ones, the blue collar superheroes that are like boots on the ground, fighting the good fight, like those guys, like they whatever they do is after their 9 to 5. It's after their 9 to 5. The ones that are in college, it's after they study for midterms, if they get a chance to study for them. So a big part of it is time, having time to do it.
Yep.
Especially when their whole mantra is, I have to save as many people as I can.
Yep.
That means they're like, hey, if I make this appointment and something bad happens while I'm at this appointment, that's on me. And I'm not willing to do that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like as a healthcare professional and a mental health provider, going into it because you want to help people. Most of us, I'd like to think, go into it for that reason. And you actually see that a lot. And so I can only imagine that the closer you get to superhero type work, the harder that gets, where you want to help people. And so you naturally take on this sense of responsibility. And in some ways, there is a responsibility. There's a responsibility to be reliable, to provide as full of quality consistently as you can, provide ethical care that is based on the knowledge and data we have on what's going to work, all these sorts of things. But what can happen is it's hard to not take on more responsibility than is yours to take on.
Right.
But it's also, you're right. So when have you done enough, and how to turn it off? That's a big question I get a lot of times, is how do you turn it off, and how do you find time to be able to put it to the side and to some extent let it go, the things that you're hearing or seeing or trying to help people through. And Yeah, I can only imagine how hard that would be for a superhero.
Right.
And you were saying that Superman, I'll give it to you. He's got more time. He's also got those pesky little ears, though.
That's
So
right. He
he's
can't
gonna
just turn it.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
he's
true.
gonna know. He's gonna know stuff's going on out there. And so even if he, quote unquote, can have the time in terms of speeding around, he's always, there's always going to be something you can help with. And so
He's
one of the
always on.
yes.
And I don't even, it's something that they never do a good job explaining how Superman does his job, because Superman is
Yeah,
also different in the sense that his job isn't just on planet. He's
good
constantly
point.
off,
I didn't even
he's
think about that
constantly
part.
completely off planet.
Mhm.
He's
Mhm.
all over the place. He is everywhere. He works during the day, he works during the night, he works through all the time zones. Like, that's one thing that's different about him. Batman, yeah, he'll leave Gotham from time to time, but it's only because the Joker left and he's going after them to throw him back in jail in Gotham. But
Only cuz he absolutely has to.
right, he does not like it. They're going to have to drag him
Yep.
up to that space station that the
Yep.
Justice League has, right? Same thing. Green Arrow, he's on the ground in Star City. He's
Mhm.
just, that's where he is now. But like Batman, not Batman, Superman,
Mhm.
Green Lantern, those guys are
Mm.
all over the globe. They're all over the
Yep.
place now, and patrolling entire sectors and doing the, like, Superman does the hardest jobs. And so he's one that I'm like, I know you have your Fortress of Solitude, but when the hell do you go there? Like,
Yeah, it is confusing how he works because based on how he looks at things, how he responds to things, honestly, it would seem like he would go nonstop.
right.
Um it's It would be, yeah, that is a really good question. When does he use his Fortress of Solitude? And the thing is a Fortress of Solitude is so important. And Lois Lane and even Bruce Wayne and all these people he has in his life, those relationships, they are important. And he has these things outside of being a superhero, and those are important. And I think that would be probably one of the toughest things for a superhero is setting aside not just time, but time that is specifically about you,
Hmm.
right? Because that's what mental health treatment would be about, is this is specifically about you, helping you better yourself. And a big part of being a superhero is being so focused on others.
Right.
But it's I don't know if you remember that story, the Giving Tree.
Hmm.
It's a
It's a
book that I
sad
read a
story.
lot as a kid.
It's a sad
Yeah, it's such a
story.
sad story.
Hate that
And
story.
so for anyone listening
F
who
that
who
story.
might not it's essentially this story about a tree that has this boy who visits it all the time, and the boy is the tree's best friend. But the tree gives and gives and gives and gives to this boy as the boy grows up, that the tree literally is just a stump at the end. And I really think that I always think of that whenever I myself or someone else I know, it seems to be giving and giving and giving and giving. We have to be careful. You have to be able to fill up your own cup in some way, because also if you give everything, you have to stop. There's
Right.
nothing left.
Right.
You've got to find ways to balance it out. And I think for superheroes, that'd be a great thing to focus on in treatment, but they have to first find the time and prioritize it enough to be able to make it there consistently enough to work on that. So yeah, I think that would
Yeah.
I agree with you. That'd be a really big
And
barrier.
the thing is, I think what gets them to go is when they catch themselves shifting.
Mm, mhm,
It kind of, it makes me think about, like, in Watchmen, you had, as far as the white male superheroes go, you had three distinct ones. You had Night Owl, you
mm,
had Rorschach, and you
mhm,
had Comedian. And I only put them in that category because all three of them had those similarities and had those backgrounds,
mm.
but had very different circumstances. But
Oh yeah.
all of them had the potential to become any of those three.
Mm,
Night Owl was the one that was like, okay, I know there's a line. and he had a little bit more stability, right? Um, Rorschach, he was the one where it was just like, I everything is bad, and I'm gonna just kill everything that's bad.
Yeah.
The comedian was just like, if this is how the world's gonna be, it's how I'm gonna be. And I just don't care anymore. It is what it is.
Yeah.
All three of them could at any point become any of the other three. And I think it takes knowing that line. Just
Mm.
knowing that line. And I mean, even if we're still on that same, if we're still sticking with Watchmen, Silk Spectre and her mom, her, she was raised seeing, okay, this is what happened to my mom, and I don't
Mhm.
want to become that. There's the line, right?
Mm.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there definitely is this
And
there's
Night
an
Owl had the
importance
first
to
Night Owl.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's I think that hits on time too, is you need the time and the space to know yourself
Yeah.
and to be able to pay attention to who you are and how you're responding to things. And I think what you're hitting on is the fact that it can be really helpful to know yourself and then also to pay attention to what who are the people you strive to be like, and who are the people, or maybe what are the characteristics you see that you want to maybe steer clear of or be different than. And so, like you were saying, where are your lines?
Right.
So Batman has some very firm lines in the sand, right? um and the closer you get to those lines, then absolutely the more important it might be to prioritize, hey, I need to step back, I need to take some space.
Yeah.
But you can be so busy, you can be going back to back to back to back, just going from one thing to the next, where you miss it. Because when you're in it, things move a bit more gradual, versus if you saw let's say a superhero is gradually getting closer to that line. Someone who saw them earlier on and then they see them when they're really close to that line, they're going to see a really huge shift. But the superhero themselves, it's going to feel more gradual most likely. And so if they're not careful, if they don't have the time and the space to be able to step back and pay attention to what's going on, and they're just acting, reacting to everything, they might miss it, and all of a sudden find themselves in real deep.
Right. And the thing is, whenever they get too deep, you always have those heroes that turn to the wrong things. They end up
Hmm.
addicts. Tony Stark, he dealt with alcoholism. Matt Murdock in Daredevil Born Again, he had some pretty bad habits. Karen Page, she was had addiction in there. Batman Venom, there was a
That's a good one.
that was one. Roy Harper, Roy Harper,
Hmm.
addiction issues. And I don't know if I mentioned Wildcat, but he had his issues as well. But like all of these characters, great people, but at the same time, you burn the candle at both ends for
Yep.
so long. It's just one of those things where he just you it something has gotta give. And here's where it gets even more difficult for superheroes. They know exactly what the therapist is going to tell them. You need to take time off being a superhero, and that's
Hmm.
like, no, that defeats the whole purpose. That
Hmm.
defeats the whole
Hmm.
purpose. And I understand that. I understand that
Hmm.
because it's like, if I can save one life, then this is worth it.
And
That's
then,
yeah.
yeah, and so therein lies the issue. So absolutely, there's this self-sacrifice that comes with being a superhero. And I think it could absolutely get in the way of being the most effective superhero, and as healthy of a superhero as someone could be. And I do think that the healthier a superhero is, most likely the more effective.
Right.
And by effective, I don't mean that I don't know, you know, a superhero that goes all in and is very passionate gets lost in it. They might be able to help this one person that another superhero might stumble with. But if a superhero isn't healthy, if they aren't taking care of themselves, then yes, they might be able to save that one person, and then they're spent. Versus being able to, okay, maybe I help someone and it's I'm not able to help everyone that I come across, but I'm able
Hmm.
to do it for years instead of I help five and then I'm dead or
Yeah.
seriously injured or my power's spent or whatever it might be. Not to mention that psychological and physical well being often, if not always, corresponds with the effective use of whatever powers and abilities that that person has.
Right.
So, keeping also in mind that the healthier that person is, the less likely there's a mistake that happens when they're able to help. But all of this is very, very hard to keep in mind when you're thinking about the potential lives lost.
Yeah.
And in particular, each superhero probably has times where they've witnessed the loss of lives. They already have that loss weighing on them in some way, and it's going to make it that much harder to say, okay, let me set this time aside. Which is, I think, a reason why things like the Justice League or Green Lantern you were mentioning earlier, when you have a team,
Hmm.
it's so much easier because there's the ability to trade off on responsibilities and take that time, right? But
Yeah.
I totally agree with you that um, there is this sense of self-sacrifice, and
Hmm.
so there's going to be a higher risk of things like substance use, um, uh, where a person is just trying to take the edge off so that they can keep pushing themselves forward.
Hmm.
And then the problem is it's going to take more and more and more to take more and more edge off,
Hmm.
and then you're going from taking the edge off to just trying to get back to baseline.
Right.
So, absolutely, substance use type issues I would expect to be very common with superheroes. And also, you're the one that's supposed to self sacrifice. You're the one that's going and helping. And
You
so,
do it so everyone else doesn't have to.
right.
Right.
And so,
That's your line. You're the wall.
flipping the script is going to feel very confusing.
Yeah.
Maybe not even be something that a person could, especially, you were saying they're going to know exactly what the therapist or what the provider or whoever that person is, they know exactly what they're going to say. I
Hmm.
think we said it last episode though, even therapists go to therapy,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes it's not necessarily about knowing, okay, what a person might say, but you know, the whole experience itself. But yeah, I bet a lot of superheroes talk themselves out of it by saying like, I already know what to do,
Well,
right? Because
because
they have
yeah.
to. They're always supposed to know what to do.
Well, because it's an added. It's unfortunately for superheroes, it's an added stressor. These are
Mm,
people who lie to every single person they see every
mm,
single day.
good
It's
point.
default. Default is lie about everything. What'd you do last night? Oh, I watched the football game. How about you? What'd you do? What are you doing for lunch? Oh, I'm just running home real quick. I got some leftovers at home. Like their job is to
Yeah.
lie. Hey, Billy's having a play tonight. Do you want to come see it? Oh, I wish I could. I have a doctor's appointment. Da, da, da. Like their
Mm-hmm.
job is to literally lie about everything. They miss the
Yeah.
birthday parties. They miss the office pizza parties, which are trash. Just pay us more, please. Like they miss like everything, right? They miss all of that and they lie about everything and they constantly have to stay on top of their lies. And that gets higher and higher and
Mm-hmm.
higher, and the excuses get higher and higher and higher because one thing that still blows my mind, and it's something that I think we've talked about as far as like hint hint what we're going to go into next season, but being a superhero only adds to the plate. It doesn't take anything off the plate
Yeah.
on the normal side. It only adds on to the plate. It only complicates things. And saying, hey, you need to take time away from being a superhero, which is also difficult because it's a job that a lot of them don't want to give up.
Yeah.
It's a very thin line because Batman is like, I wish I didn't have to be Batman, but I have to stop crime. And him saying that he's going to try and stop all crime, in all honesty, is right there on the level of, you know what? I'm going to stop all air pollution. And it's like,
Mm.
that's not, you are, you're reaching for an impossible task. Like it's impossible. And I
Well,
love
and
that you're fighting the good fight.
I would also argue, given who Bruce Wayne is, he does not want to stop.
He
I
doesn't want
don't
to
I don't think
stop.
he ever wants to stop being Batman.
I don't think so.
And that's another piece too is I think there are a variety of reasons that superheroes do what they do. Some there might be an obsessive quality, and arguably they they might even have a distraction piece to it. And I
Superman
would say that,
complex.
well, yeah, but I mean, a Batman complex too. I mean, like,
Yeah.
let's be real here, right? You know,
Yeah.
he's avoiding a lot of uncomfortable feelings under there. And then
Absolutely.
even if you're a superhero who's doing it purely out of the goodness of your heart, and you just have a lot of empathy, and you happen to have the skill set to help, and you're not necessarily trying to chase away dark shadows or anything, even so you're going to see a lot of stuff.
Hmm.
And so one of the really tricky factors is a lot of times there can be a hesitation of, I don't want to crack this thing open because then everything's going to spill out. And it could even be like, okay, I'd be willing to go and see someone and take care of this little bit by little bit, but there might also be a realization that it's not that easy. And
Yeah.
so having to deal with what comes out, and like you said, there's a lot of lying and deceit and other things for a number of different reasons. But yeah, I think one of the really relatable things to, I think, the rest of us is that concern and maybe even fear of what might come out, and then what do you do with it? And
Right.
how do you keep going about your life in opening up whatever admittedly needs to be opened up about, but it's not like life stops
Right.
when you get that help. And so I think that could be a really, really tough thing if you're, say, Superman, or Flash, or whoever you are.
It kind of reminds me of when we're talking about superheroes and how they don't take breaks. It's There's always something going on. There's a line, I think it's let me think. I think it's in the first Men in Black movie.
Mm,
And uh Will Smith's character is Jay. He's upset about something and he's angry. He's like, "We have to stop this. We have to." And Tommy Lee Jones' character, the veteran Kay, who's been in it for a long time, he says something along the lines of, "There's always some kind of death ray or
mm,
plague or something that's about to wipe out life on this planet. Like there's always something." And you have to be calm. You have to, and I think his quote was talking about how you have to stay in the shadows. You have to stay secretive because otherwise everyone
mm,
panics. And I think that's how superheroes also think. They're like, no one's able to stop this but me. And if the world finds out about it, it's going to be a lot worse, right?
mm,
And it's funny because even thinking about the Batman family and how so many of them are seem to be like in a better place mentally than Bruce is. And part of me wonders if it's because they always know, well, I know Bruce is out there, so I can I can study for another hour.
I
Like if we're being
mean,
honest,
yeah.
like all the Robins still went to college. Like they still they
It's
went
a
away.
really
Like,
great
you
point,
know?
and I think, yeah, there are these varying levels, and I think you're right. Is that that's another piece too? Is knowing that there's someone else out there that's gonna sacrifice themselves and just take it all on. Sometimes we try and help them out and balance things out, but then other times we might take a little bit of advantage of it
Yeah.
to get things done. One of the things that struck me when you were talking about the Men in Black piece is, um, I think would be another big factor for superheroes, which is trust.
Hmm.
And how would I trust the provider? How would I trust whoever it is that I'm getting help from? And which is once again, I mean, hopefully it's really obvious as we talk about these things. Oh, hey, gee, that's funny. All this stuff really relates to how all of us going to treatment might look. But I think this piece is also a really big one that relates to the everyday person, which is a lot of times if you're going into treatment, there's been some sort of piece about trust can often be there. Um,
Absolutely.
and for superheroes, I'm thinking like, oh geez, so okay, whether you go as your alter ego, whether you go as the superhero itself, whether you go as both, I would imagine there'd be an even extra layer of how do I know I can trust this person? How do I know that they really care about me versus it just being their job? How do I know that they're really going to keep my things private and be respectful of me? And, we all like to think that everybody in a certain profession, especially a helping profession, is going to be completely 100% above board. But then, let's say you're Batman and you know about Doctor Strange and you know about, like you could list off all of the healthcare professionals that
Right.
are not so great in
Yeah.
Gotham. So I think trust would be another
Well,
big.
yeah. And another level of that trust is we have to think about how many superheroes don't have the law on their side. Like,
Ooh, another good point.
Batman's finally, I mean, and it depends on the story, but he's finally in a place where it's like, oh, I can trust Commissioner Gordon. And if another cop sees me, they don't shoot at me on sight. Right? Like he's finally in
Yay.
that position. But how many stories have we seen where it's like Green Arrow is wanted in the connection of this
Mm.
murder that he didn't actually commit? And so is Batman. And like all of these different things that happen. I mean, even in like Smallville, Clark would just Clark was suspected of something for saving too many people. Like he was like the sheriff was like, "You're always here on the scene saving people. You're up to something, right?" And so when that many people just always are after you, you're not going
Yeah.
it would be hard to like go down and sit with the council and be like, "Hey, um so if I'm being honest with you, it's not just the office job that's stressing me out. I have a cape and that that's not
Mhm.
it it's very difficult for that to happen. And so as far as trust goes, you need to probably find someone that's like because and this was going to bring me to my next question.
Mm.
As a therapist, and I feel like I've asked you before and I've just forgotten,
That's all right. I'll
uh
answer it again.
but what is it that you're required to report
Mm.
to the law?
Yeah.
As far as secrets that people tell you, things that people confide in you, like
Yep.
because you it's I know it's different for therapists, and I think I've asked uh my uh my wife about it before because she's Catholic, and I've asked her, I'm like, if you go to confessional,
Mm.
are there certain things you tell the priest and they just have to like report? Like, how does it work for
Yeah.
therapists?
Yeah. So, in general, when it comes to healthcare providers, and, I speak from mental health, obviously, myself. Um, so, it's a really great question, and one that I think is, first off, should always be gone over with any mental health provider that a person has, even if they've been through treatment a number of times. It's good to go over. And so, I have a spiel where I talk to people about so here in the United States we have HIPAA, so people have confidentiality, they have privacy for their healthcare information, outside of records and things, and things shared amongst their providers to make sure that we're providing care that you know coordinates effectively across. I'm not sharing their information without their permission. So like if for example, I don't know. Let's say Clark Kent comes to me for therapy, and I get a call from Lois Lane, and even if they're already married, and she's like, hey, I want to talk to you about Clark and some things going on with him, and I don't have a release of information for permission to talk with her, then I'd be like, I cannot confirm nor deny that I ever see a person. They could always leave information with me, but I couldn't really confirm if they were sending it to the right place, or if it had any relevance or anything like that. Um, so in general, we can't even acknowledge that we're seeing someone unless we have permission to talk to that other person.
Mhm.
So there are exceptions. So for what we call vulnerable populations under the age of 18, so children over the age of 65, people with a disability, or something that limits their ability to protect themselves potentially. If there's any abuse or neglect that's happening, then we would need to report that to Child or Adult Protective Services. Um, if there's immediate risk of a person killing themselves, then we would have to focus on safety first. And then in many states, also, if there seems to be immediate risk for another person, then something would need to be reported so that person could be warned. And then there's also bench warrants that can happen. So the court system could request records. And
Mhm.
so I always like to make sure people are aware of that too. But yeah, it can be really tricky. Some people are really concerned about how their information might be shared, or
Mhm.
what might be seen as a safety issue. So, like, let's say Arrow. I think that was a really great example because he seems like someone who might go off and kill somebody, because sometimes he does,
Well,
right? So
those first like 1 or 2 seasons, he had no issue with it.
he's kind of just going around murdering people, right?
Yeah.
So um, it's so there's this piece where you want to maintain confidentiality as much as you can, but you also have to be mindful of safety. um but it really is more of a, like, if someone was like, man, I really wish that I could just go and murder that person. Which people say, sometimes we don't love somebody, and and we think of what we might do to them. But there's
Election
a
years, I
difference.
tell you.
There's a difference between a thought and a potential for actually, say, committing a crime.
Right.
If someone were like, I'm gonna go rob a bank, I'm not actually supposed to tell anybody, because that there notice how I didn't say anything about breaking that confidentiality, because someone's breaking the law, right?
Mhm.
Now, if someone was like, this person, I'm going to murder them, and they're actually going to follow through. It's not just a, like, sometimes I think about how I want to kill my wife or whatever. Um, then in, I think, most states, that would be a case where you have to actually notify and make sure that someone's aware that their safety might be at risk. But
Right.
so for Arrow could be tricky. So if someone was like, "Hey, I murdered somebody," well, that's not risk to anybody. But Arrow is kind of tricky because depending on where you're at in his story, he might be pretty likely to go kill somebody, like, right after your session.
Right.
I would be consulting with a colleague, ideally someone who has a lot of experience
Right.
when it comes to more what we might deem aggressive behaviors,
Yeah.
violence and that sort of thing. Because with that one, yeah, I don't. If you don't have anybody to warn, if you don't know where they're going next, then I'm not really sure what you can do.
Right.
But if it's someone who goes out and kills regularly, yeah, I don't
But
know. I don't know what I would do in the
but
case of Arrow
but
season one.
here's the thing. So not even kill, but say for instance, uh, that like you've got Batman on the couch, and and this is like, you don't know how awesome he is yet. You're just hearing him just tell you, yeah, I saw a guy last night shoplifting and I broke his arm. And
Yeah.
then I saw someone, I saw someone breaking into the Gotham Gazette to get dirt on someone. I snapped his leg. And then
Mm.
there was a criminal and I had to interrogate him. So I put his head underneath the Batmobile tire. And like, you're hearing all of these stories,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, one, this superhero cannot be truthful to their therapist. And two, if you're a good therapist, I mean, you you gotta say something to someone, right? Like that guy that we saw in
Mm.
the news with the broken leg, I think my
So
guy, I think that was, he told me he did it, and the other guy. As a matter of fact, most of this hospital, like everybody up on the
yeah.
third floor, I think that was my patient that did that.
And so you'd
Right?
probably be consulting with somebody purely because you would probably need to be processing it yourself and sorting through what you're dealing with. And hey, we're humans too. So sometimes interesting things happen and you might share that with someone else just to be able to share that. Um but I mean nothing you're saying is something that I would say like report to police or anything. I mean, I guess you could have someone who risked risked losing their license, risk getting in trouble to break confidentiality when they're not supposed to. I mean, it happens.
Right.
So the people who, for example, get fired because they look up famous people when they go to the hospital, which is terrible, by the way. Please do not do that. Um,
It's
so
horrible.
people are people,
Hmm.
right? We're nosy. And hey, if you're in mental health, uh you might be nosier than the average person because you went into something where you dig in on a lot of different details in someone's life. We might self-select. I don't know.
Yeah.
So we might be nosier than the average bear for all I know. Um, but at the end of the day, so the confidentiality, and this is United States specific, but it's there for a reason. And
Right.
so for better or worse, and to be quite honest, I don't know. I mean, it would be near impossible to study, really.
Hmm.
Uh, but so that trust is important, right? So superhero ain't gonna come to a provider if they didn't have these HIPAA protections,
Right.
because you're just gonna chat to whoever you want about the fact of who I am. There need to be some sort of regulations and restrictions, and I think that's a symbolic way of just generally talking about our everyday stuff. We need to know that we can trust that person, at least professionally speaking, that okay, they're supposed to be keeping these things to themselves. They can't just go and talk to someone else. And yes, there are these extreme circumstances, um, but part of the hope is that it gives people the openness and ability to really work on the things they need to work on.
Hmm.
Because, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head with the superheroes. So, um, you could even be showing up to mental health help, but you're not actually getting the help, even though you're sitting in front of the person because you're too worried to share the real stuff.
Absolutely. If Frank Castle came and sat on your couch and told you what he did,
Yeah.
you're you got to call the cops, right? Like it's.
We talking about what he did or what he's gonna do?
I mean, both. I don't. I
If
mean,
you
he's
tell me
not gonna
something he
stop.
did,
It's
but
not
but
okay.
I
Wow. Okay.
yeah. Yeah. So I mean, what someone did is different than what they're going to do, right? And we're talking about risk.
Okay. This is so. All right. This is very very interesting to me. So like, and like for example, like an uncaught serial killer could come to a therapist and be like, I'm retired, I don't do that anymore, but this is what I used to do. Y'all aren't required to report that.
I mean, I would be consulting for sure on that because they're
That's
if
very
you
this is
have
very
someone
interesting. I'm sorry, I'm not. We'll get back to what we're
you're
supposed
also
to do,
making
I
I'm also
promise.
like, ooh. I'm gonna need to. You're gonna hear me say it again and again. Anything where it gets complicated, consult, 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 consult. Um, and that's the thing. People shouldn't work just like superheroes. All right. I was saying it's easier if you work as a team. You need your people. You need to have others that you can talk these things through with when you need to. And I think too, like the American Psychological Association and some of those professional boards, you can also reach out. A lot of times they've got like places you can reach out for added consultation on like the ethics of things. Um, uh, but so if someone has a pattern, so the concern with a serial killer would be kind of like Batman, right? So
Mhm.
okay, so how impulsive might we be getting to, or how deep of an ingrained pattern is this? Because our patterns of behavior can be really hard to change.
Right.
And so if there was repeated things happening, then I would definitely want to consult with someone, especially because um, you might end up in scenarios where you're getting a sense that there is danger and risk of for someone's life without getting the full story, full picture, right? And so what
Right.
do you do with that? Um, but yeah, and different people respond at different levels
Hmm.
when it comes to risk. So I tend to work with a lot of people who have very chronic issues with thoughts of suicide, maybe even some past suicidal behaviors, also thoughts of violence and maybe some past violent behaviors. And so when there's that chronic piece, so once again, there's that trust component. And so sometimes when people open up and they tell you all these things that they're thinking about, you react because it makes sense to, and you worry and you're concerned, and at the same time the only thing that's changed is they've let you into what's going on in their mind every day. And so there's a difference between thoughts and action. And at the same time, if there's a lot of these thoughts going on, you want to make sure to reduce risk. So, yeah, it would be tricky because if there was a large pattern, I definitely want to consult with someone, and have someone I could touch base with too if I was getting a sense that um, that that person might kill in the future.
Hmm.
Uh, because yeah, so past behavior that it increases the risk of future behavior.
Right.
But if someone told me something they had done, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something coming up that I
I
need to
got you.
worry about. So yeah, it's tricky stuff. And talking it through can be helpful,
Hmm.
and also what level of intensity things are happening, it's going to hit people differently, right? Like just because people are different. So some people might, for example, call for a welfare check earlier than another provider might. And so the questions you're asking are really helpful questions for, say, the superhero to ask their provider or whoever it is, to just get a sense of what that looks like, because some people are actually understandably afraid to share things that are nowhere near getting close to being reported to anybody,
Right.
because they're worried. They have the same misunderstandings that you might, right? They might think that, hey, if I break the law, you've got to tell someone.
Right.
Well, no.
Right. And then so there's two other things that I think there's two other big things that I think hinder superheroes from going to therapy. The first is being a superhero is a lot of these characters outlet.
Mm.
Like they swing through the city to de-stress. They drive their car through the roads and fight crime to de-stress and feel like they're doing something with their life. That's their outlet. It's like I build Lego sets and this is part of what they do. It's what they, and honestly, what they enjoy. They do it with a smile. And then if their buddy comes to town and he's a superhero too, they're out fighting crime together. And Bruce is frowning, but he totally loves that Clark is there fighting crime with him. Like, and so that's their, but for one, it's like, I'm thinking about these superheroes. I'm like, man, they need to speak to someone, but also it might be worse if they weren't fighting crime right now. Like, and then on the other side of that, um, same coin, both to the other side of that though is how many of them are scared that they're going to walk into that office and sit down, and once they talk to the person and they're honest with them, the person is going to say, you need to stop being a superhero. Because I
Mm,
think that's the biggest fear. How many of them are going to say, hey, actually, I want you to go to a support group and stop breaking arms? I want you to go to a support group and stop punching villains in the face. I feel like a lot of their fear is that, hey, I'm gonna tell this and be honest with this therapist, and this therapist is gonna be like, and this isn't for all of them. This isn't for all of them, but I feel like there's a good amount of them. The therapist is gonna be like, the reasons that you're doing this aren't healthy.
mm. This feels a little similar to something that comes up, I think, quite a bit as a reason people might not look for help or might be hesitant to openly share if they're getting help, which
Right?
is this fear of you're going to think I'm crazy. And in particular,
Yes.
you're going to
Yes.
think I'm crazy and you're the provider. So that means that I am, which deep
Yes.
down, a person is
Yes.
really afraid that no, I think I'm crazy, right? Tends to be underlying there. So that feels kind of similar to me where, I mean, being a superhero is, it's a choice and it's an interesting one. And so, yeah, when it comes, once again, there's a variety of different providers out there, but we try, a lot of us are trained to approach things from a humanistic standpoint, and it's meant to be non-judgmental and open. And we're people, we're humans, so we don't always achieve that. But those traits within treatment tend to be seen as very helpful. And there are a lot of different approaches that get you to the same point of being careful that you don't put labels on people or try to shift a person to go in the direction you think they should go, but you're helping them find their way to where they're trying to go. But yeah, a lot of times people are afraid of, if I put this down in front of someone else, am I going to find out my worst fear here,
Right.
that I need to stop or that I'm crazy or, um, you know, any number of things. I think hopefully what happens most of the time is that a person is met with someone who wants to hear, wants to understand, and is approaching them from the sense of, based on you, based on your experiences, based on your genetics, your biology, your cultural history, all these things coming together, who you are and where you are right now makes sense
Right.
based on all of those things. There's no crazy or not crazy. There's no should do this, shouldn't do that. It's here's the reality you're in, and how do we make sense of where you are based on all these things coming together, and then what brought you here, because something about that isn't working for you, and how do we get you from where you are to somewhere that is going to work better for you. And you know you're right in that being a superhero, you're talking about, there are so many things they probably enjoy about it. Or I was also hearing some hints of, there's meaning, there's purpose, there's value to things. um I mean, for some, it could maybe almost become an addiction. You were talking about addictions before, so for some, there might be that piece. But there's also, even when it comes to addiction, yes, there's sobriety and cutting something off completely, but most everything in life, there's a way to do harm reduction. There's a way to say, okay, how do we do something in a way that we make it balanced? Um, any too much of anything is bad for you. I mean, drink too much water and that's bad for you.
Hmm.
A basic thing we need to survive,
Right.
right? Um, so yeah, it's I mean, there are exceptions, right? If someone comes in and they're describing, I don't know, that they're using meth or heroin or something, like there are certain things where it's like, okay, well, that's probably causing you problems. Or someone's smoking. Okay, that's causing problems for you. Ideally, we can get you to a place where you're stopping that. Super heroics and most things in life aren't that simple. Um, but yeah, I could totally see that being a reason that a superhero would be hesitant or get going to someone and they just don't get why you would do this thing, the superheroics, and might almost see it as some sort of quote unquote insanity to live your life in that way. Because I mean, if you think about it, it's a it's a hectic way of life. It's intense.
Mhm. For whatever the superheroes are going through, I do love how you related it back to what the average person deals with, that fear of
Yeah.
going to talk to someone and being told what they're afraid of, that they're, like you said, quote unquote, crazy. And because we all have things that we're hiding, we all have things that we don't want to talk about. And it reminds me of a quote in, I keep coming back to Watchmen, but it's the
Mm.
Watchmen TV show. Hooded Justice is talking to his granddaughter at the end, and I think the quote is, "You can't heal under a mask because wounds
Mm.
need air." Right?
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was, yeah, and so it's one of those things where it's like, whether you're wearing a cape or not, we all have secrets, and
Mhm.
the only way we can ever hope to get better
Mhm.
is to share it with
Yep. And
someone.
you have to get through that fear of the reaction. What if they think I'm quote crazy? What if they see me as the villain? It's
Yeah,
another one. What if this means that I'm evil or bad or failure or whatever it might be? Admitting failures.
yeah.
Or times where they weren't able to save someone or weren't able to do. Yeah, I really like what you were just talking about where and you were even saying earlier, these are people very used to putting on the mask
Mhm.
and they only take off the mask if they're alone.
Right.
And yet, yeah, you've got to air out the mask. Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown.
And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JVS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/battherapy. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.